We begin with breaking news out of Washington, where FBI Director Kash Patel is facing a sudden firestorm tonight. Multiple law enforcement officials now confirm that an FBI SWAT team, one of the Bureau's highest-level tactical units, has been assigned to protect Patel's girlfriend, country singer Alexis Wilkins. The decision, approved earlier this week, is sending shockwaves through Capitol Hill.
All right, look, there are headlines that make you raise an eyebrow. And then there are headlines that make you stop mid-scroll and go, I'm sorry, what? And this one is the second kind. Because apparently, in the year 2025, the FBI director, Kash Patel, decided that one of the most elite tactical units in the entire federal government should be assigned to protect his girlfriend? Not a federal witness, not a judge facing threats, not an election official. No, his girlfriend. And the best part, we're supposed to pretend this is totally normal, totally standard protocol, totally what SWAT teams exist for. Okay, sure, let's just go with that. But hold on, because this gets even better. The FBI has spent the last 2 years telling Congress that they're understaffed, overworked, and stretched thin, that they don't have resources to protect key officials who are getting daily death threats. Judges have been requesting emergency protection and getting denied. Election workers? Denied. Prosecutors? Denied. But somehow, there's magically a fully armed, highly trained SWAT detail available the moment the FBI director's girlfriend needs it. Wild coincidence, right? And here's the part they really don't want you to notice. This isn't happening in isolation. This comes right as Kash Patel is already under fire for the mass firings inside the Bureau. Firings that multiple lawsuits call retaliatory. Firings that senior officials say were driven by political pressure from the White House. Firings that Patel allegedly admitted might be legally questionable, according to court filings. So when you line that up next to this SWAT detail story, you start to see a pattern, and none of it looks good.
So let's just ask the question everyone in D.C. is asking right now. Was this a legitimate security decision? Or was this yet another case of Patel using federal resources like their personal favors? Because if it's the second one, and wow, does it look like the second one, then that's not a small issue. That's not oops, paperwork mistake. That's the kind of thing that triggers congressional investigations, oversight hearings, and possibly criminal exposure depending on what information comes out next. And yes, that's why people in Patel's orbit are reportedly stunned by how fast this has blown up. But stay with me, because the fallout is already starting. Multiple congressional offices have requested documents, oversight staff want the threat assessment, lawyers involved in the ongoing lawsuits are now pointing to this SWAT deployment as more evidence of an abuse of power pattern. And career officials inside the FBI, they're furious. Some are calling it unprecedented, others are calling it an embarrassment. One source literally said, "We don't do this, ever." And here's the twist. This might be just the beginning, because if the documents Congress is asking for actually show what people inside the Bureau think they'll show, this scandal is about to get way bigger than just a questionable security detail.
So let's actually break down what happened here, because the moment you start looking at the details, the story stops being weird and becomes absolutely unbelievable. And the fact that this isn't the #1 headline on every major network right now, that tells you more about the current media environment than anything else. Because if this exact situation involved literally any other administration, it would be DEFCON 1 levels of outrage on every front page in America. We're talking emergency panels, special reports, congressional press conferences every hour. Instead, we're getting FBI confirms security measures like it's a footnote. And that silence, that's the red flag. Let's start with the timeline, because the timeline is where the whole thing falls apart. According to federal officials who spoke to multiple outlets, the threats against Patel's girlfriend, Alexis Wilkins, started increasing after Patel became the face of the FBI's controversial restructuring. Fine, that's believable. Public controversy tends to increase harassment and threats toward people associated with public figures. But here's where it gets messy. There's no evidence that the FBI conducted a standard threat assessment before deploying this SWAT team. None. There's no record of a formal evaluation. There's no documented risk rating. There's no panel review. There's no interagency memo, at least not yet. and the FBI refusing to release that paperwork that tells you everything. If they had the documentation, they'd release it in 5 seconds. What they don't want is Congress seeing how flimsy or non-existent the justification really was.
So what do we have instead? We have credible threats, according to anonymous officials. And look, credible threats is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. That phrase is Washington's favorite escape hatch. You can slap credible threats on literally anything, and suddenly nobody's allowed to question it. But if this was truly a high-level, imminent threat, deserving of a tactical protection detail, why wasn't the DHS involved? Why wasn't the U.S. Marshals Service brought in? Why wasn't this coordinated through the Office of Protective Operations? That's standard procedure. That's what happens every single time a real threat rises to tactical level. But this went straight to SWAT. SWAT, a team normally reserved for anti-terror, hostage rescue, high-risk apprehension, or major federal raids. Not paparazzi, not angry tweets, not directed commentary. There is no world, none, where this is protocol. And here's where the pattern comes back. Because this marks the third time in Patel's short tenure as FBI director that he's taken actions that bypass standard procedures. The first was the firing of senior agents connected to politically sensitive cases. The second was the reassignment of multiple long-term supervisors without the usual internal review. And now this, a tactical deployment for a private partner. You don't need a law degree or an FBI background to see what's happening. You just need a functioning set of eyes. This is the consolidation of personal power using federal infrastructure. This is exactly why functional democracies build safeguards around law enforcement authority, and this is exactly how those safeguards start eroding.
But let's zoom out, because the political reaction tells its own story. The moment this became public, congressional offices lit up like a Christmas tree. Democratic offices immediately recognized this for what it was, a potential abuse of federal authority. The phrase undue influence showed up within an hour. The phrase resource misuse within 30 minutes. And then, here's the surprising part, Republican offices started calling too. Quietly, of course, because nobody wants to be the Republican who questions the Trump-aligned FBI director, but people talk, staffers talk, oversight committees talk. And when Republican staffers are whispering that the move looks deeply irregular, that's not small. And yeah, I said deeply irregular, because those are the exact words being used behind closed doors right now. Irregular, concerning, constitutionally questionable. You can practically feel the panic building, not because lawmakers care so deeply about procedural purity, but because this is yet another scandal draped over the FBI director they just spent months fighting to confirm. If he goes down, it's not just him going down, it's the senators who pushed him through. It's the members who endorsed him. It's the administration that backed him. This isn't a maybe he made a mistake situation. This is a did we just tie our political credibility to someone who's becoming a liability? And just wait, because the reaction inside the FBI is worse. Career agents are furious, asking questions like, why him? Why her? Who approved this? What precedent does this set? People inside the Bureau have been warning for weeks, that Patel's leadership is eroding internal norms. He's been reshuffling departments, moving investigators, firing people tied to Trump-related probes, creating a loyalty versus merit dynamic that's already fracturing morale. So when May found out a SWAT team was deployed for his girlfriend, that wasn't seen as a security decision, that was seen as confirmation of every fear they've had since the day he walked into the building. And here's the twist. They're right to be scared, because right now, the oversight committees are drafting document requests for the threat assessment, the authorization memo, the internal communication chain, and the names of the officials involved. And once those documents come out, and let's be honest, they will leak long before they're officially released, this story could jump from troubling optics to potential legal exposure.
Because here's the piece most people haven't caught yet. If Patel personally influenced the deployment of a federal tactical unit without proper authorization, that's not just a bad decision. That can fall under misuse of federal resources, and that's the kind of thing that can escalate fast.
But the most unbelievable part, this isn't even his biggest problem. Because the lawsuits filed by the fired agents, those are still hanging over him like a storm cloud. And those lawsuits allege he fired people for refusing political interference. They claim he admitted some moves were likely illegal. They claim he retaliated against agents who worked on Trump-related cases. So when you put that next to this SWAT story, you start seeing a narrative prosecutors love, a pattern of using the FBI not as a neutral institution, but as a personal lever. And if those patterns intersect, even slightly, this becomes a significantly bigger issue. The internal investigators know that. The Department of Justice knows that. And yes, Congress knows it too. Which is why the oversight requests coming this week are going to be brutal. They're going to dig through everything: email logs, authorization chains, threat reports, protective operations memos. And the question hovering over it all is simple. Was this decision legitimate, or was this another example of Patel acting like the rules don't apply to him? But stay with me, because once you see how Patel is responding behind the scenes, the picture becomes even clearer.
Because the way Patel is reacting right now, inside the building, behind the scenes, according to people who've interacted with him in the last 48 hours, tells you everything you need to know. Publicly, he's pretending this is all business as usual. Security concerns, standard procedure, that's the line. But privately, it's clear this caught him off guard. Stunned is exactly the correct word. People inside the Bureau describe him as agitated, short-tempered, abrupt, which is exactly what happens when someone knows a story is spinning out faster than they can control it. And the more frantic the reaction, the more obvious the pressure becomes. And here's the key part. Patel is reportedly demanding that staff stay on message, which again is not abnormal. Every federal official wants message discipline. But what is abnormal is that he's allegedly pushing senior staff to avoid answering detailed questions about the timeline, because the timeline is the Achilles heel. The timeline shows this wasn't a considered, carefully evaluated, bureaucratically vetted decision. This was fast, too fast, faster than any threat response typically moves unless there's imminent danger, and nobody in the building has seen any documentation that suggests imminent danger. That's why staff are uncomfortable. They're being told to defend a decision they haven't seen any justification for. And in a place like the FBI, where documentation is essentially the religion of the institution, that's a huge red flag.
Now, here's where this takes a turn, because the people who are most frustrated right now aren't Democrats or Republicans. They're career civil servants, people who've given decades to the Bureau, people who've survived multiple administrations, people who've seen controversial directors come and go, and those people are saying the quiet part out loud. This is starting to look like a pattern of personal decision-making masquerading as official action. And that is exactly the kind of phrase that makes oversight committees salivate. Because if there's one thing Congress knows how to do, it's take a story like this, one questionable decision, and turn it into a full-blown investigation. But let's talk about why this specific decision is resonating so powerfully across Washington. It's not just the SWAT deployment, it's not just the optics, it's not just the timing, it's the symbolism. The FBI director using elite tactical resources for his partner feels like the exact opposite of what an accountable, apolitical institution is supposed to look like. It cuts at the core of public trust. It immediately raises the question, if this is happening here, where else is it happening? What other decisions are influenced by personal preference? How many other exceptions are being carved out behind closed doors? And the thing about symbols is that they stick. They don't fade when the news cycle moves on. They stay in the political bloodstream. They show up in hearings. They show up in court filings. They show up in talking points. They shape public perception. And right now, the symbol attached to this story is simple: the misuse of federal authority for personal benefit. But here's the twist. They may not be able to put this back in the box because congressional offices aren't just looking at the SWAT decision. They're looking at everything around it. The pattern of firings, the restructuring, the internal dissent, the swirling lawsuits, the claims that Patel pressured staff, and now this security detail. And when oversight committees get a pattern, they don't stop. They pull the thread and they keep pulling until something snaps. And if you're wondering how far this might go, here's a preview. Staff are already drafting questions that go well beyond this incident. Questions like, has the director ever influenced security decisions for a personal associate? Has the director ever bypassed the standard threat assessment process? Has the director engaged in conduct that constitutes preferential treatment? These are not small questions. These are not symbolic questions. These are questions that point directly at misuse of authority. And they don't ask those questions unless they think there might actually be something there. And look, here's what people forget. Oversight investigations don't have to uncover crimes to cause political damage. They just have to uncover bad judgment. They just have to show someone cut corners. They just have to prove someone used their position in ways that violate internal norms. In Washington, norms matter. They aren't written down in law books, but violating them creates its own kind of scandal. And right now, Patel is standing at the intersection of legal exposure, political exposure, and institutional distrust. That's not where any federal official wants to be.
But let's not pretend Patel is the only one sweating right now. Because if this escalates, the White House is going to get dragged into it too. Every controversial decision made by an agency head eventually ends up on the president's desk, politically, if not literally. Congress will want answers. Committees will demand explanations. And if the president defends Patel, then the administration owns his decisions. If the president distances himself from Patel, then Patel becomes a political liability. Either way, the fallout expands. And the worst part for the White House is that this didn't even come from a major policy decision. It came from something personal, something unnecessary, something that should have been handled by the book and wasn't. But there's another layer people aren't paying attention to yet, the legal cases already underway, because the attorneys representing the fired agents are watching this like hawks. They understand exactly what this story represents. In legal cases involving misuse of authority, establishing a pattern is gold. If you can show a leader repeatedly used his position in irregular ways, it strengthens every claim of retaliation or procedural violation. And Patel's critics? Well, they've just been handed a piece of evidence they couldn't have asked for in their wildest dreams. A tactical deployment for a private partner without transparent justification? That's narrative rocket fuel. And here's the part that should keep Patel up at night. If the documents Congress is requesting show even one procedural deviation, one skipped step, one signature out of order, one request that didn't follow chain of command, then this becomes a legal problem. Not just a political one, not just an optics one, a legal one. And that's when staff start going from "we support the director" to "we were following orders." That's when institutional loyalty collapses. That's when people flip to save themselves. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just look at the history of every major federal scandal. It's the same pattern every time. A questionable decision, internal dissent, quiet warnings, leadership ignores no warnings, press gets a whiff, Congress gets involved, documents get pulled, emails get released, and suddenly something that started as bad optics becomes a months-long investigation with subpoenas, hearings, testimony, leaks, and headlines. And right now, Patel is just at the beginning of that cycle, the very beginning. But stay with me, because when you see how the media is framing this, you'll understand exactly why this scandal is accelerating instead of fading away. Because if you really want to understand why this story is exploding instead of disappearing, you have to look at how the media is covering it, because the coverage is not uniform, not even close. Some outlets are treating it like a minor personnel footnote, like FBI confirms protective detail assigned. Others are digging into the timeline, the authorization chain, the threat classification, the use of SWAT roles, and the internal dissent. And then there are the opinion shows on both sides that are already framing it as another data point in a broader pattern of politicization at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. And here's the thing, when the coverage is this fractured, the story grows. It doesn't shrink. Let me explain what I mean by that. In politics, the most dangerous stories aren't the ones that get universal outrage. They're the ones that produce conflicting narratives. Because conflicting narratives force more reporting, they force more questions, they force more investigation. When one channel says this is routine and another says this is unprecedented, that inconsistency becomes the story. And once reporters start really digging, things unravel quickly. You don't get to put the toothpaste back in the tube.
And the inconsistencies here are glaring. One network reports the SWAT team was authorized because threats were credible. Another says the evaluation process was ongoing when the deployment happened. Another says senior officials objected internally. Another claims Patel was directly briefed before any paperwork was filed. These aren't small differences. These are totally different stories. And if the FBI wanted to shut down the speculation, they could do it instantly. Release the threat assessment, release the authorization memo, release the chain of command log. But they haven't. And when institutions stay silent in the face of conflicting narratives, there's usually a reason. Now here's where this gets even more interesting. Some outlets are focusing on the SWAT part of the story, others on the girlfriend part. Both are important, but it's the combination that's driving the public's reaction. Because people get the symbolism. They know what a SWAT team is. They've seen it in movies, shows, documentaries. The word alone carries weight. It conjures images of high-risk raids, fortified suspects, imminent danger. So when people hear that a SWAT team was deployed around the girlfriend of a political appointee, they don't picture bureaucratic protocol. They picture something extreme. And when the public perception becomes extreme decision, the burden of proof shifts. Suddenly, the FBI has to prove the decision wasn't extreme, not the other way around. And trust me, that's a losing position in a political environment where institutional skepticism is already sky high. People don't trust the FBI the way they used to. People don't trust political appointees the way they used to. People don't trust government explanations the way they used to. So when you throw all of that into the same pot, a story like this blows up in seconds. And the fact that Patel is at the center of it, someone who already arrived with a controversial political background, only accelerates it.
But let's talk about the part nobody's discussing enough, the pressure this puts on the FBI's internal structure. Because this isn't just about one decision. It's not even just about one scandal. This is about what happens to a federal agency when the rank and file lose confidence in leadership. And according to people inside the Bureau, that's exactly what's happening. Morale is dropping, trust is eroding. Senior staff are worried that Patel's decisions are turning the FBI into a political lightning rod instead of a credible institution. And you know what? Those fears are justified, because when leadership starts bending rules, or even appears to be bending rules for personal reasons, it undermines the entire foundation of the agency's authority. We've seen this before. Every time a federal agency gets pulled into political turmoil, the internal fractures widen, career staff retreat, political appointees dig in, oversight increases, administrative bandwidth gets eaten up by scandal management, and the agency's ability to function suffers, and that's exactly the risk right now. The FBI cannot afford to be another institution that gets dragged into political warfare. But that's exactly where Patel seems to be steering it. And here's the part that makes this whole thing even more consequential: the lawsuits. Because while Congress and the media focus on the SWAT detail, the fired agents' lawsuits are quietly picking up steam. Their attorneys have already filed motions requesting documentation related to the internal restructuring. They've requested emails, memos, notes, logs, and guess what they're going to request now? Any and all communications related to the decision to deploy the SWAT team. Why? Because if they can connect that decision to broader patterns of procedural deviation or personal favoritism, it strengthens every claim in those lawsuits.
Think about that. A personal security decision, something that had nothing to do with those agents, could end up becoming the very evidence that helps them prove their case. And that's how scandals grow. They start in one place, and then they bleed into everything else. They become symbols, they become patterns, they become narratives. And once you lose control of the narrative, you lose control of the scandal. So yes, Patel is stunned because he didn't expect this story to grow legs this fast. He didn't expect bipartisan concern. He didn't expect staff to leak internal doubts. He didn't expect the media to split into conflicting narratives. And he definitely didn't expect the lawsuits to potentially weaponize this against him. But that's what happens when decisions are made impulsively, without documentation, without transparency, without understanding the stakes. And the most ironic part, if the threat against his girlfriend was genuinely serious, following proper procedure would have protected him fully. There would be no scandal, no questions, no investigations, no document requests. But by rushing the process or appearing to rush it, he turned what might have been a legitimate security decision into a political firestorm. And here's the final piece. This scandal is now in the phase where new information will only make it worse. Once oversight requests go out, people start talking. Once documents start circulating, reporters dig deeper. Once leaks start flowing, the story evolves from what happened to what else happened that we don't know about yet. And when staff feel leadership is unstable, they stop protecting leadership. They start protecting themselves. And that's when the real damage begins. That's when scandals stop being controllable. That's when institutions start distancing themselves. That's when political allies go quiet. That's when public trust erodes even further. And based on the reporting emerging tonight, that's the direction this is heading.
Because the question is no longer why did this happen, the question is now what else is happening behind the scenes that we don't know about yet. And the moment that question takes hold, the situation becomes bigger than any one decision, bigger than any one official, bigger than any one news cycle. It becomes a crisis of credibility. And right now, Kash Patel is standing right at the center of it.